Oh, there we are.
Yep.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Society of American Archivists Records Management Roundtable Google Hangouts. This is, for those of you new to the Roundtable, a semi-regular series where we try to talk to people working in archives and records management about various topics of interest to our membership. Today we have Arjen Ravenbach. Did I get that right? I always screw up your name. I'm sorry.
That's fine. You were right. It's good.
Okay. Arjen is a records management policy analyst in the Office of the Chief Records Officer at NARA, and he has. Oh God.
Don't worry about it. We'll handle
Oh,
it.
I see what's going on
That's
here.
good
Hang on.
enough.
All right, I had it open myself. Sorry about that. So, anyway, he is been working on the electronic records management and eGov policy team. He blogs for the NARA records section blog, and we also have Beth Crone. Beth works in what? Remind me, Beth, what area of NARA you work in?
I work on the same team with Arjen.
Oh, very good. And she is also the vice chair of the Records Management Roundtable. And today we are going to talk to them about the Capstone initiative. So just to get us started, to give us a frame of reference, can you explain Capstone briefly? What it is and what problem it was trying to solve?
So that's a challenge. No. First, let me just do a disclaimer at the beginning. Beth and I are speaking on behalf of. I mean, we're trying to address this presentation to a broad audience, not
Right.
necessarily a federal audience.
Sure.
So I will just say it up at the outset that if you're a federal agency interested in implementing Capstone, and there may be some roundtable members who are working in federal agencies or with federal agencies, that they should work through their records officer and their traditional NARA appraisal archivist to get the sort of the official view of Capstone. We're going to do our opinions and try to give you some context about what Capstone is, and hopefully keep it at that high level, because I do think there's a lot of takeaways from our Capstone experiences that may be helpful to anybody dealing with records management.
Great.
So having said that and sort of set the framework, I think to answer your question, Brad, Capstone comes out of the well, partially it came out of it started with a Managing Government Records Directive. And in that directive, federal agencies are required to turn over to manage their email electronically by the end of the calendar year 2016. So that set a deadline in place. Now, anybody who's worked with records management, knows that email is a challenge. Email is a particularly challenging thing to do because most traditional records management rules, when applied to email environments, require individuals to take action. Somebody has to save an email or move it into a records management system, maybe a DoD certified system to manage the records. Or they have to print and file, and print and file is certainly not a sustainable process moving forward. So Capstone sort of tries to address that issue. How do you get to the 2016 goal of the presidential directive where email has to be managed by federal agencies in electronic forms? How do you get there knowing what we know about sort of the limitations of records management, traditional records management techniques as applied to email?
Okay, so where did this come from? How did you get to the point where you said, let's try this new strategy?
Well, I think, and Beth can weigh in here as well. I think the first thing to say is it took a rather large group of people at NARA to work together and come up with a solution here, or to come up with this new technique or new strategy. Certainly, we had support from the top level managers. The Chief Records Officer of the United States, Paul Wester, was very interested in in pushing this forward. Our general counsel office gave us a lot of support while we were implementing this process. And the team was put together, sort of the records management policy team that Beth and I sit on, was given the responsibility of sort of analyzing this problem and coming up with a bulletin. I think it's fair to say that one of the things we were trying to do is look at success stories that we have for capturing email, and one, while governed by a different set of laws, the Presidential Records Act and the Presidential Libraries have been collecting large swaths of email for as far back as the Reagan years. So we have that experience, which, just for simplicity's sake, basically every email in the White House governed by the Presidential Records Act is a permanent record and has to be captured. So they've been capturing all that stuff for a long time on that side. And it was just a way to look at how we can use the Federal Records Act, is there a policy that we can put under the Federal Records Act to sort of align in that direction or start heading in that direction.
Right, and also recognizing that very few agencies were managing their emails electronically. Like Ariane said, they had print and file policies in place, or even some agencies did have repositories in which they're collecting email, and that this could be an approach that would work for them, since they're already collecting it in their e-discovery tool, or they have some kind of journaling system set up that's capturing that email. So I guess what Capstone is, I can talk a little bit about that. So what Capstone is a high-level concept. It's an approach to managing email. So I like to say it's not a software system. It's not an application. NARA is not going to be rolling out any kind of software for agencies to use. But it's an approach that allows agencies to look at the positions of people within the organizations and the work that they do, and to look at where the permanent email will be within the organizations, and then designate certain accounts as permanent. So it's looking at email at the account level. And so this would reduce the need for item-by-item filing. So as we all know, we probably don't go through our email every day and pick out which ones are permanent, where some people do spend a lot of time doing that, but it takes a lot of time. So it's trying to reduce the need for that item-by-item filing, and also to use the systems that agencies have in place right now. So Capstone doesn't say that agencies have to buy a certain tool or a certain piece of software. They can use what they have in place now, and they can put in place policies and procedures and training to make Capstone work now.
Right, and that's a key thing to point out, that what we recognized was a lot of agencies had invested heavily in e-discovery kinds of solutions that allow them to capture all their email. Those were generally, I think it's fair to say, always installed with little records management thought. It was just, we need a way to capture email when we need to turn it over in discovery or for FOIA purposes. And so agencies were investing in e-discovery solutions, email vaults, and we've put out, if you go back through our guidance, we were writing guidance about email vaults several years ago, and coming to the conclusion that those weren't record-keeping systems because they didn't go far enough. Well, that sort of what Capstone does is say, all right, is there anything there built into those email vaults that agencies we knew were purchasing that can be leveraged in a records management way? And that's sort of where the idea or the thinking came from. And then given the deadline of the directive that, by the end of 2016 agencies have to manage their email electronically, it kind of made sense to start moving in that direction and to see where we are. But it's also fair to say that we're very early in Capstone, so we don't know. I mean, we're still in a learning process with agencies and a training process with agencies, and we'll see, obviously, to meet the deadline, we're going to have to assess where we are at various stages.
Okay. So this next question is from the blog. It's sort of a methodological question. And I shared this this question myself because the commenter was interested in a similar approach for their institution, but they were concerned that they would have trouble convincing council and the state agency that approves the record schedule without some data to point to. So what kinds of studies and surveys did you conduct while deciding that this was the direction you wanted to go?
Well, I think it's important to go back to sort of the premise there, and the premise being the understanding the difficulties that agencies were having in complying with records management guidance in the first place. So generally speaking, there was a dearth. We recognize that traditional records management techniques and strategies don't handle email appropriately or very well. So it's how do we solve that, and how do we go there? And I think what Capstone does is say, let's flip it so we're getting all of it, and then we can decide, allowing agencies to build in tools that allow them to capture all their email. And then we know we're at least capturing the corpus of email. So it's just sort of, it's not so much that we went out and analyzed 300 agencies and figured out, what they were doing and what their limitations were. It's just sort of taking that premise and saying, look, we're having trouble capturing large quantities of email. We are getting some email, even in traditional ways, print and file ways. Agencies that have case files still have to file their email in those things, and we're getting those. But for the broad swaths of email where we think there's permanent records, we have to improve the way we're getting those and the way we're managing those. So it's a bit of a challenge for us on that score, and I think what Capstone does is try to solve that.
Right, because the appraisal archivists are also in constant contact with the agencies, and they're talking about their issues and what their concerns are, and email has, as you might guess, been at the forefront of those for quite some time. And so I guess the part of that question, I would say, would be getting maybe the right people around the table to talk about these concerns. So as happens from agency to agency, there's a different situation in every agency, different concerns, different systems, different policies and procedural concerns. So we talk in the bulletin about getting the right people around the table and making that case, looking at looking at what email is coming into the archives or into the records management program, and being able to put together all of that information and make the case. So getting senior management around the table, your general counsel, if you have FOIA, or if you have Freedom of Information Act, or your privacy staff. So getting all these people around the table and talking to them about what their concerns are, and putting together a policy that would work in your organization.
Great. A couple follow-ups. First of all, how are you making the determination of which officials are important enough to be preserved under this Capstone approach? Is there a concern that significant accounts may fall through the cracks that wouldn't ordinarily be preserved under this approach?
Well, I think that would definitely be a concern, and so that's why we talk about about agencies needing to come up with a list of people in consultation with their senior management and their general counsel. And in the bulletin, we do talk about a couple resources in the federal sphere. So we talk about the Plum Book as a place to start. That's the government policy and positions book would be a place to start to talk about your presidential appointees, your heads of departments, your assistant secretaries, those levels. And then also talking about other programs or parts of the organization that may also have permanent accounts within them. So it may not be, if you're looking at the little capstone, you have the people right at the top, but then you may have different programs within the agency where they also have permanent accounts and those should be taken under consideration. So depending on whether you're in a university or a company, you can look at org charts, different hierarchies, and looking at where the permanent records could be created.
And could I just add something from a university perspective?
Mm-hmm.
We have considered this sort of approach at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. In fact, I think my colleague was one of the people who asked this question about how do you decide which accounts should be Capstone accounts and designated to be permanently retained. Our university, and I think probably a lot of others, already have these kind of administrative roles on the technical side in place. So we call them here deans, directors, and department heads, or the DDD list. So I think that would be, in our case, a really great resource to use to kind of select these Capstone accounts. Of course, there's other people who are going to need to be rolled in if we do decide to do that. But just an idea for those of you in a university setting. And the good thing with that is a lot of those accounts are already designated in this group, so we have a technical infrastructure in place to kind of move that forward.
Okay. I think that's true in a lot of organizations, that they already have sort of thought this through, whether it's for, think about continuity of operations planning, where you need to identify critical people who need to be involved in case of an emergency. Those folks are already the kind of folks that you're going to want to start populating this list with. It helps if you've already thought this through. I think it's also important to note that agencies aren't going to be allowed. There's still going to be a traditional appraisal/record scheduling activity that goes on with Capstone. So it's not as if when agencies will have to work with their NARA appraisal archivist to start doing Capstone and to meet sort of the requirements. And we envision those appraisal archivists also having experience with the agencies to sort of help them through this. Where do you go from? How do you begin? And there isn't a requirement in place that you have to do it for your entire agency. You can do it for smaller programs. If you want to pilot it out in, say, the Office of Public Affairs, just to see how it would work and what the implications are for your agency, that's allowed under Capstone. So it's not going to be something like the entire Department of Defense and its 20 million account holders, is going to go to Capstone right away. I think it is a process, and some agencies are going to have some agencies have robust IT infrastructures and a lot of things in place that are going to facilitate that process. But on the other hand, we recognize that for other agencies, they're going to want to work through this at a much slower clip. So it's designed to be flexible and help agencies, again, meet to because the direction we're moving in is that requirement in the directive, the 2016 email requirement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so hitting on the flexibility it's trying to create a way forward to handle those temporary email accounts that aren't going to be permanent and that aren't eventually going to go to the archives, creating a way forward to dispose of those. Mm-hmm. And I think another point in selecting the officials is that this is an iterative process. So it's not a list you're going to make one time and then it's going to be set. So, I mean, this recognizes that people may change positions. Somebody may be in one position one day and then move to a higher position, and that list is going to need to change. And I think be constantly reevaluated and making sure that the right people are on the list and that they're being captured.
Okay. So the idea of a sort of an iterative process takes me to my next question, which is I'm curious about the I guess the processing archivist role in the Capstone system, because you are knocking a lot of accounts out of the appraisal ecosystem with this, but you still are likely going to have a large number of personal or non-record emails in there. And so what happens to these? what sort of strategies are you exploring with this next step?
So I think there's several points to make in response to that sort of concern. The first thing is that from a practical standpoint, or what the bulletin allows agencies to, one approach that they can take is screen those out before transfer to NARA. So it doesn't become a NARA problem. That the agencies could have tools in place. Maybe they inform the users. Maybe they run some computer-assisted technology on their side. So they do we call that culling. They call out the personal non-record material before transfer. In which case there is no, that kind of goes away from the NARA perspective. I think it's also, we realize again, not all agencies are going to be equipped to do that because they're not, they're not in the same place. We have examples to go back to the presidential records side. That's what they have. They have large bodies of email that presumably include, millions of email from a presidential administration, and I'm sure there's a few. Pick up this from the grocery store on your way home tonight. We're out of milk. So I'm sure that stuff is in there, and you have to sort of acknowledge that up front, that's part of what you're going to have to do. And we hope with some computer-assisted tools that we get to a system, or we think technology is going to move in that direction to help make that easier, that you can point, whether it's some kind of automated solution against a body of email and have it screen out the personal emails and screen out the non-record. We hope we can get there, and maybe we're not totally there yet, but I think technology is moving in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. So it does recognize that personal and non-record email could be captured, and that's one of the risks. And so NARA does encourage agencies to implement some kind of culling, like Arian just described, whether that's at the individual end user level, that they could go through and mark emails non-record or personal, or whether they do have some automated means of doing that, some kind of auto-categorization to pull those out.
Right. So this is going to involve, to do Capstone, the agencies are going to have to commit to training their employees, informing them what the responsibilities are and what things can be done, and that's an issue that I think it's fair. NARA's not going to come out and say directly, we'll give best practices and we'll give tips, but when you're dealing with, again, the number of agencies we deal with and the size of these agencies, we're not going to have a one-size-fits-all solution. So there's not going to be a one set of rules that they can follow. And I think agencies, as they implement Capstone, will figure this out. And hopefully we'll share this. We'll use our Records Express blog, and thank you for plugging that at the beginning of the Hangout. We'll use our Records Express blog to share this, not with, obviously, internally in the federal government, but also anybody who's interested. That's where we hope to get this information out there to folks.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So I have another question from the blog here. Does Capstone advocate using cloud-based storage? And does cloud-based storage have any significant advantages or risks for the Capstone approach to email archiving?
Well, I'd say that Capstone definitely would work for a cloud-based approach, and that we do say that right in the bulletin, that this could be a really good strategy or a good approach for agencies that are moving toward a cloud-based email system. Especially at points of transition, it can be a good time to rethink these things. If you're implementing a new cloud-based system, you have the ear of your IT folks, and as you're talking about these things. So it's certainly not a requirement. It's not mandatory to have a cloud-based system. The focus was on the flexibility that agencies can use whatever system they have in place. And so if it's just cloud-based from a storage perspective, it might not make much of a difference, I would think. But if the cloud service provides additional services, such as some kind of auto categorization or classification, that could be a useful tool. So might just depend. I don't think it makes much of a difference, I guess is my answer.
Right. Capstone is designed to support a variety of implementations, and cloud is certainly one. In fact, I would argue, I mean, NARA, our intern. So the strange position that we're in is on the policy side, we issue policy for the entire federal government. Now, one of those entities is the National Archives and Records Administration. So we have our own internal records management division headed up by Susan Sullivan. And Susan's working through this very issue now, because we are essentially a cloud-based email operation right now. We've switched over to Google for our email, and we have a tool built in on the back end to help the archival management side. And Susan's working through implementing Capstone with our agency. So that's a different, that's kind of one hand writing rules for the other hand to carry out. In fact, earlier this week we hosted a session at our main building in Washington where we brought Susan in, and we brought some of our general counsel folks in. We brought some of the appraisal staff in that have been creating the training materials around Capstone, and they held a session that was recorded, and we're going to post a video of that on our blog that's going to go into a lot more detail on sort of some of these issues that we're talking about. And so I'll put another plug in to follow the blog for the latest and greatest, because we think that video is going to help agencies with specific training issues and talk about this in more detail.
Yeah, and we will post a link to the blog on our blog so that anybody who's interested can go and check it out. It's very worthwhile reading, I think. I'm not just saying that because one of the key writers is on here. I actually do think that.
And Beth is actually the deputy writer of the blog.
Well, everybody contributes. That makes it good.
Okay. Where would you say you are in terms of implementation? Have you run into any major problems, or do you anticipate, or what kind of problems do you anticipate?
I would say, to use as anybody who knows me knows I'm a soccer fan, I would say we're still in the first 10 minutes of the match, so to speak, on implementation. There's a long way to go as agencies come to understand what's in Capstone. I mean, we're doing, and full marks to our training team and the folks on the appraisal staff who've gone out, and pretty much it's a have podium, will travel kind of situation whenever we're asked to go out and talk about it. They're spending a great deal of time, this fall and last fall and early into this year, going out and training everybody and trying to get the word out. So I think it's very early in the match, and we're trying to figure out where this is going. Certainly, we kind of know where we think, or at least it's easy to speculate where you think the issues might be. I think there is a concern that what kind of technical infrastructure agencies have in place, and how they can support Capstone or not support Capstone. Agencies have to figure that out. There are challenges in implementation. How are you going to turn this on? What are you going to do? I think it's also important to note that Capstone still requires, and I alluded to it earlier, that if they have traditional processes that capture email, think about a case file where it's a printed file, and they're filing these case files. And if there's email in that, they're still going to have to do that. They're still going to have to print them out and put them in those files, because in theory that's what they've been doing for years, and we don't want to interrupt. We can't change those processes. Or we don't want to change those processes. So I think as we implement this moving forward, we're going to hear from agencies, hear some of their experiences, and maybe if we were having this conversation in 2015, we might say, well, here are the things we're changing about Capstone, or here's the new bulletin that sort of updates the approach. And I think that's, this is not going to be we throw this up and walk away from it. I think we want feedback from everybody as federal agencies are trying to implement this, and see what needs to be improved, see what things worked, what things didn't work, and we're committed to, again, driving towards that 2016 goal trying to help agencies get there the best way they can.
Yeah, and I think that said, we'd also, if other organizations, your university or company or other places have experiences, we'd like to hear about those too. And so, like Ariane said, the blog will be the place where we share about these things as we learn about the challenges that agencies face. I would guess, my own opinion, that some of the implementation issues would run along the implementation of new policies and procedures. I would guess running along the end user lines. If it's not seamless to the end user, if they still have to take some kind of action, then it's probably going to maybe be some issues there, or maybe not. I mean, it's going to have to be definitely a concerted effort to train people so that they're aware of what's happening, so that people know whether they're a permanent account or whether they're a temporary account and what that means as far as how they manage their email. So education, training, the change management, I think those may, my guess of what some implementation issues may be.
Great. What if somebody either, well, yeah, I'll do that. If somebody either within the federal government or outside the federal government were thinking about implementing a Capstone type process, what kind of advice would you give them? What is the most important thing that they should know about doing?
The most important thing about any is to get the right people in the room at the beginning. I mean, this is records management 101 in a way. I mean, you need to have the key stakeholders involved, and clearly with Capstone, that's as I've mentioned. It's the general counsel staff. It's the IT staff. It's all of these people have to sit around the table and understand what's happening and make sure that, if the system is if you're going to implement a Capstone approach, the people who are doing the records management piece connect? Do they have access to the IT, the email vault that the agency or the institution is using? Can they go in there and pull out email that's permanent? Is there a way to transfer that? I mean, all of those questions have to be set up front. So I think that component is the most important thing. If you have those folks in the room, hopefully you can address these concerns, make the decisions, and get to a place where you can have success. Because as we all know, that any IT project, if it's hard to get success. Users aren't going to adopt it. It's not going to work. So you need to set that up front. I think that's the most important thing.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, because there's the IT side, and then there's also, probably just as important as that, is the policy side. So when developing the Capstone approach for your organization, you'll have to identify all of the pieces of technology and the tools and the resources, and it may take a lot of time on the part of the records management staff to do this. So probably say that would be the first step.
And then from the NARA perspective, or adding in a federal perspective, we want our appraisal staff to work with the agencies as well, so they can. And this speaks to the discussion we had earlier about how do you identify those accounts, and are we getting those accounts? Because we do want to make sure that we capture all the permanent accounts. And for some agencies, that might be very clear with the Plum Book. The Plum Book is the book that lists all the presidential appointees. So it's the book that the administration uses to decide, hey, these are all the people, these are all the slots we have to fill in the federal government. So that's a great place to start. But are there other programs, other offices further down the organization chart that have permanent email? And that discussion has to happen as well when you're implementing this, because you want to make sure you're capturing all the permanent records.
Okay. So I think that is all the questions we have. Do you have anything else that you want to say about the Capstone?
I did also want to say that there is currently a video up on YouTube that people can watch from another training presentation that was obviously geared toward federal agencies, but I think that's about an hour and a quarter long. So if you have a little bit of time and you want to get into a bit more detail, that's available. And I think, like Ariane said, there's going to be another video available soon, and possibly more in the future.
Right. I think I mean, NARA is committed to getting this message out as often as possible, and video allows us to do that in an easy way. I also think it's important to realize this isn't just, you know, yes, the policy team wrote the bulletin, but we had a lot of, I mean, Beth and I are speaking on behalf of the policy team, but there's a lot of people at NARA who were interested in making this work and making this successful for us. I think having the deadline in the directive helped a lot of focus. We had a lot of interest and support around that to bring it to fruition. But it is a policy that I think many people worked on it. So it's you know, I think that's important to just make sure everybody knows that it isn't just sort of a small thing that was done in a vacuum. We tried to reach out across the National Archives to get a lot of input, and frankly, the directive came out over a year ago. We put out Capstone a few months ago, so you can imagine we've been working on this for over a year to get to this point. So I think that's important to say.
Mm-hmm. I have a question, just really quickly, you guys. Mm-hmm. Oh, shoot, it's just leaving. Oh, are you aware of any, or have you heard tell of any state governments or local governments or any other corporations or institutions who are kind of heard about the Capstone and considering doing it themselves or already implementing it?
Well, I've certainly heard from colleagues, generally privately, asking me questions along the lines that we talked about earlier, is you know, where they asked and said, look, well, I'm thinking about doing this for my institution or my college or my university. I think not so much. What's interesting to me is it's the private sector part. I'm not as, and maybe it's because I'm more active in SAA than ARMA or some other groups, mm-hmm. where I don't know. I mean, I think it's happening a lot more on the private side, on the private sector side, but I'm not aware of any specifics. I think a lot of the college and university archivists have talked to me at conferences or come up to me or sent me an email and said, you know, what are some of the things you're going through? So I think it's an interesting idea, and I'm very optimistic that we can put out that this is a policy that's scalable, that once we come up with some rules and we show people how we've done it, I think it can be scalable at other levels of government, whether it's state, local government, colleges, universities. I think all of the things we're learning translate really well once you defederalize the jargon. They can translate really well for other institutions, and I hope to see that. I hope that, you know, Capstone's one area where we can get better email management, because everybody, what I said at the beginning, everybody sort of long recognized that this is a problem. Email is a problem from a traditional records management standpoint because of the nature, and the systems aren't in place. And we could talk for another hour about DoD 5015's limitations, and how do we solve that? And I think Capstone's an approach that we're taking, and hopefully it can be replicated in other institutions.
Yeah, I don't know of any specific cases either. We would love to hear about those. I recall an AIM post that someone had done on Capstone pretty soon after it came out, and it seemed, I feel like there are a few comments along the lines of, this is nothing new, this is not a new idea. And so I think the idea has been around for a while, and this is just trying to put the policy around it so that agencies can try this approach.
Well, right. I mean, because we're stealing the Presidential Record Act model, right? And that's been around for a while. So,
right.
I mean, in a way, yes, there's nothing new here, but I think what's new is trying to make it work for for the federal government, which is a very large entity, and just saying this is going to be the preferred approach. Get to the point where these things are happening, the records management of emails happening automatically as opposed to catch as catch can kind of solutions.
Great. All right. Well, thank you both for your time and for answering our questions about Capstone. I'm really excited about it. I think it sounds great, and I, hope to, I think we would all like to hear more about it as it goes along. So, I at least will be following your blog with great interest. I encourage our viewers to do the same. And again, we'll post this link and all of the links that have been mentioned to the Records Management Roundtable blog, and I think I've been tweeting them out as we've gone, but I'll check it to be sure. Yeah, this is for anybody who somehow got here without reading our blog. It is saarmrt.wordpress.com. We'll send a link to the listserv, and tune in next time. We don't have a program yet, but we hope to have another good one like this.
We have some ideas.
We have some ideas, yes.
If anybody watching is interested, let us know.
Yes, please.
Well, thank you, Brad and Meg, for hosting, and I hope we've answered some questions without causing too much friction back home.
Yes, thank you for this opportunity.
No, thank you for all the great information shared today.
Absolutely. All right.
All right.
See you guys next time.
Bye-bye, everybody.
All right. Bye.